I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like. What's up, world? Welcome to another edition of I Mix What I Like right here, Black Power Media. Again, I'm Jared Ball. Happy to be your host. As I said, as I've promised and mentioned, I have long wanted to do a little epigraph episode. I was told initially that, unfortunately, and I never knew this, that Paul Grave would not be covering the copyright cost for or clearance efforts for epigraphs, which are, if you're not aware, just the introductory quotes that you often find at beginning a chapter or something like that. And I never knew that you needed a copyright for that. I thought that if you cite the source, it shouldn't. But nevertheless, that's what they said. I'm not in position or of much interest in making an issue of it. So figured we just turn it into a short little discussion here. So let's get into it and cover some of the lost tapes, the lost epigraphs of the myth and propaganda of Black buying power. Second edition on its way. Let's go. Now, the first one here was part of the original forward. And as you see here, something I reference all the time, Kwame Ture, sometimes still only referred to as Stokely Carmichael. Black visibility is not Black power. And ever since I read that years ago, I believe it's in the Black Power book with Charles Hamilton. It's just bars. I mean, it.
Now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
And it speaks largely for itself. We can't just continue to be convinced that beautiful people that we aspire to are representing or representative of some actual change in the lived experience and material reality in real life. So, and it's just more so today than ever. At the time he said that, we were nowhere. Nowadays, it's a much more serious issue. But he was warning us, and he was prescient, and he remains correct. And in the next one here, anybody's familiar with, and I honestly haven't heard from the brother in years, and I hope he's okay. One of the houseless, legendary, brilliant poets of the DC community. For years, I would see him perform. I would run into him at activist events, run into him just in the street. And the brother who would go by the name Face. And in his favorite poem, well, I should say my favorite poem of his, he used to, in a very aggressive and powerful way, raise this question about recognition. And I don't know that I have the best interpretation of the poem, but I always just took it as, when you see him as someone who's houseless, when you see Black people, someone who have been rebranded and reconstructed out of a sort of an African original, so to speak, do you recognize me? Do you, you know? And so in my thinking, it was just sort of, when you see the reality of the situation, in this case of Black economic condition or material reality, do you recognize the data? Do you recognize the argument? Do you recognize your own condition? Can you recognize your own condition after it's been reconstructed and propagated and mediated and all of these other things? That Jimmy Cliff song, commercialize, mobilize, advertise. What's that song? That great song that I actually got in the middle of nowhere in Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, in a little record store, a cassette of Jimmy Cliff and a Jimi Hendrix one too, by the way. Anyway, so that's what I was thinking of with that one. And so yeah, so there it is. So now you get to see what would have been part of the original forward. And shout out to Face. I hope he's all right, and all the brilliant poets out there. So this next one, meant to be part of the original preface. obviously I open up talking a little bit about the juxtaposition of December 4th and how it is both the birth date and assassination date, December 4th, 1969, of assassination of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark, and the birth of Jay-Z, and what that means in juxtaposing politically the two trajectories. So I had this quote here from Fred Hampton: "Socialism is the people. If you are afraid of socialism, you are afraid of yourself." Just a clear, just, again, juxtaposition between the two. And then because I open up talking about the story of OJ, just again, a quick juxtaposition to the lyrics from Jay-Z, which are in stark contradiction of the trajectory of Fred Hampton. So these are some of the lyrics that I reference and just had to rewrite into the chapter itself to talk about it. So again, I could reference it and even quote it within the chapter and then cite the source, but putting it here as an epigraph is somehow a copyright infringement. I'm not really clear on that, but in any event, so as he says here, you want to know what's more important than throwing away money at a strip club? Credit. You ever wonder why Jewish people own all the property in America? By the way, did he ever get any of the grief that anyone else gets for that? Saying that Jews own all the property in America? How did they do it? Do it by financial freedom, my only hope. So as I even re-edited it, you'll see in the I reworded it in the new edition. I come back and talk a little bit more because I actually sort of didn't like how I left a couple things unsaid about this point. So I just add a little bit about why, again, in microcosm, Jay-Z's argument here represents the macro myth making about, for instance, property and land ownership. If in fact Jews or anyone else own all the property in the country, well, then where is the property for Black people to now buy and invest and take it over and then increase their wealth? Similarly, within Jews or the Jewish or white communities, if a handful own all the property, even within those communities, not everyone in those communities has access to or benefits from the ownership of a handful within that community. So again, we don't want to just see a situation where we're replacing this current system with a Black-led one, where it's a handful of Black people that own all the property and live in all the nice neighborhoods, and the rest of the Black community remain in current or worse condition. That's not the point. But also when Jay-Z, and I talk about this in the new edition a little bit, and shout out to new edition, puns intended. When Jay-Z talks about buying property in Manhattan, he talks about it lamenting his ignorance. But the reality is, if you just look at the history of the Dumbo region of Brooklyn and the rest of Manhattan and rest of property in New York, it's all bought up by a handful of people. So even if he had the financial literacy and foresight to do it, when would he have been able to buy? What would he have been able to buy? It was already owned, is really the point. I bought some artwork for $1 million. 2 years later, that shit worth $2 million. A few years later, that shit worth $8 million. I can't wait to give this shit to my children. And again, it's only worth that if someone richer than him or as rich as him or someone with that level of money buys and determines it being worth that and then is willing to pay for it. And it's not something that can be replicated. Again, I bought some artwork for $1 million. How many people could do that? How many people are in a position to buy anything for $1 million? So again, when the elite talk about what they've done or what they want to do, they're not, and then they suggest that this is something that is replicated. That's when I think it becomes a problem. So that's really what I was just, looking to point out here. And then the rest of it, by the way, is just the same Jay-Z kind of lyrics. You're talking about taking advances. We're taking chances. You're talking about Graham Holden. We're talking, there's a disconnect. We don't call that money over here. Well, I mean, again, Jay-Z has always been talking about, I have been richer than you, better than you, smarter than you from day one. I live a life you can't lead and don't know anything about. That would be more honest economically if he brought that logic to class that he did to drug dealing and rapping. It would make more sense, because then it would be, you're right, we nobody can do what you're doing. It can't be replicated. It certainly can't be replicated throughout the entire community, which is of course the point. And that's why Abraham Harris was so, I think, right in his initial work on this, to be so, he even goes beyond where I maybe would go with it, but to be that critical of the Black capitalist class. It's not that they are the cause of the problem. It's not that they are the enemy. It is that they are perpetuating a myth with greater power than white colonizers and capitalists are able to do. So this one here would have been from chapter 1, from the We the People track on Tribe Called Quest's last and final album, which I think is a great album, by the way. It should still get more attention. But as Q-Tip says here, guilty pleasures take the edge off reality, and for a salary, I'd probably do that shit sporadically. The OG Gucci boots are smitten with iguanas, the IRS piranhas, see a nigga getting commas, niggas in the hood living in a fishbowl. Gentrify here, now it's not a shithole. Trendsetter, yeah, I know my shit's cold. Anyway, just thought I like that. Obviously, Trump had said the whole thing about shitholes, and I can't remember the exact timing of this, but this was probably recorded before he said that. I'm not entirely sure, but either way, the overlap or the parallel is timely. And the point as I read it is that once the gentrification starts, you recognize that these communities are destroyed as you take them over. When you're not focused on them and are just from a distance destroying them, there's no need to label them as anything. There's no need to recognize them. I also like the reference to the fishbowl because, of course, as we're gonna, as I talk a little bit in the book and reference routinely, Marshall McLuhan's line about we don't know who discovered water, but we know it was not the fish, because an all pervasive environment is always beyond perception. So of course, I like, I like that line for that reason as well. Though I don't get to really come back to this in the text of the book. So I'm glad I get to do this little lost epigraphs episode of I Mix What I Like. And right with that, from that same chapter would have been this one here, that during the initial live stream book launch from 2020, I tried to play this and I think it got copyright blocked. But from Rhapsody's track Oprah, dollars, dollars, dollars circulate is the hook. I want the checks with them commas. Little old me come back to say we made it. And it's, again, I don't know enough about the artist Rhapsody or Leigh Kelly, if I'm saying her name correctly. 47. The track called Oprah. I don't know to what extent they're being sarcastic in this track. I don't know to what extent they are actually aspiring to this or believing in this myth of circulating dollars. But I just heard it. It was a relatively new track. And I thought, here's again, ironically or not, here's the myth being circulated once more. And I don't remember the full track itself, but I do remember that not feeling like they don't say anything overtly to contradict this if they're being ironic. And I don't think, and so either way, whether it's meant to be taken seriously or not, it's a reference to the mythology is really what my point was. And that they titled it Oprah, the sort of do they genderize? Do they no. Do they no. I was gonna say, but I don't think that's the word I'm looking for. The sort of queen of Black capitalism and mythology. And who really the late now Barbara Ehrenreich, in her book on no, it wasn't Ehrenreich. It wasn't Ehrenreich. It was another woman, Peck, Janice Peck. And I got grief when I interviewed her on my old radio show some years ago. But Janice Peck, because she's a white woman criticizing Oprah, but the reality is the argument was exactly correct. And it was about promoting capitalism. It was about promoting mythology. Forgot the exact argument, but it was really well done. Neoliberalism, I think, was the frame, and I thought it was just a really good critique. And so anyway, so and in this chapter, this is the propaganda versus economics, where I talk about the construction of a myth. And essentially in the chapter, I'm saying the economics are very, ultimately, once you peel away the layers of the nonsense, it's not that complicated. Black people don't have any money. So this idea of circulating nothing among a community and having that turn into something is kind of like the mathematical impossibility. All right, so this one here would have been from chapter 2, a quote from Tom Braden, who worked both with the CIA and CNN, which I still think I just think it's perfectly appropriate. Quote, "It's a shame what happened to the CIA. It could have consisted of a few hundred scholars to analyze intelligence, a few hundred spies in key positions, and a few hundred operators ready to carry out rare tasks of daring do. Hmm. Instead, it became a gargantuan monster owning property all over the world, running airplanes and newspapers and radio stations and banks and armies and navies, offering temptation to successive secretaries of state and giving at least one president, Nixon, a brilliant idea. Since the machinery for deceit existed, why not use it?" So in this chapter 2, Buying Power Not Protest, the Myth Prevents Unrest, where I talk about the origins of the cost of living and buying power concept and the purpose of managing dissent, and then start to talk about Nixon's administration in its direct attempt to get rid of Black power as it was originally conceived and reconstructed as Black capitalism and mainstream engagement with electoral politics. This is uh, I thought this was just an appropriate quote um, to start off that chapter, and because also the chapter talks a little bit about the CIA and its engagement and the intelligence community's engagement with propaganda and psychological warfare, and even directly with the promotion of Black symbolic advance. So, thought that was an interesting take from someone who apparently was in a position to both understand what the CIA was doing and how it worked well within a media apparatus meant to promote the same kind of politics and interpretive lens. And this one here from where would I rank this? Life from Eddie Murphy is at the top of my Eddie Murphy films list. I think I have it higher than Harlem Nights. I think I have it higher than Distinguished Gentleman, which is quietly one of my favorites as well. But in the movie Life, his character, obviously, if you don't know the scene, they're in a prison camp, and the white prison guard is expecting Eddie Murphy's character to discipline Martin Lawrence's character, and he hands Eddie Murphy a shotgun, and Eddie Murphy says, "You don't want to give me that gun, boss. I just might shoot you with it." And I used to play that clip on my radio show as a drop, but and I've always meant it. Well, I probably meant it in the way, took it as the way the film meant it, but I've always thought of it here in my work in terms of, don't give me that analysis, don't give me that framework to work with, don't give me that data, don't give me that information, because I might shoot you with it. And that's how I felt about this book and this work, that here's the data, and I'm attempting to destroy those who mistakenly made that information available, given that they are also responsible for what's going on here. So yeah, it was just that simple. This one, of course, from one of my favorite, most referenced books, Francis Stoner Saunders, The Cultural Cold War. But this is just again from the chapter on the media environment that makes this mythology so easily distributed and impactful. Um, but this is what Jason Epstein, editor of the CIA-funded Congress for Cultural Freedom, said, that I think it is in so wide application and in such great use today in so many different ways, that it's again, um, if nothing, I mean, if nothing else, is this is definitely just
Now listen, that's called my boy. You know nothing about that.
yeah, it's just bars, all bars all day here. As he said, quote, "It was not a matter of buying off and subverting individual writers and scholars, but of setting up an arbitrary and factitious system of values by which academic personnel were advanced, magazine editors appointed, and scholars subsidized and published, not necessarily on their merits, though these were sometimes considerable, but because of their allegiance." I mean, that's just it. And that's why, sometimes I talk about the need to be self-critical or just aware of why we are individually invited or welcomed into certain spaces. Um, no one is saying, Jared, you're here because you do this, that, and the third, or we're paying you, or we're constructing you to do this, that, and the third. We're inviting you here because you already do it. And it's the same all the way in all these other spaces. And we can think it's because our merit deserves it. Merit, it's meritorious, but and sometimes it is. But same thing I say about celebrity and artists. The talent is irrelevant. It's their political cultural function that is sustaining their celebrity. Particularly people who have sustained it for decades or over some period of time. That's why. And this idea that it's about our individual talent or genius is irrelevant. Is not maybe irrelevant, but certainly not the main point. So I just love that. And that's why, again, the well-funded and supported purveyors of the myths, no one needs to tell them to do it. It doesn't have to be some overt conspiracy. It is already arranged as a conspiracy. So it's like all of us engage in it and support it unconsciously without even a particular invitation. It's deep. This one was to obviously adorn the chapter on banks from Marisa Baradaran. Instead, they got a bank. I'm very happy that in the second edition, I was able to come back and because what I didn't like about the first edition is that once they took out this epigraph, I sort of left it at, I didn't adjust the chapter properly to explain the reference in the chapter to what would have been here in this epigraph. So I got to do it and do it a little bit better in the second edition. So I get to explain a little bit about what they mean. And the point simply being that just as today, Black people are told investment, banking, this, that, and the third is a path to advancement of some kind, if not total freedom. But as Baradaran really, I mean, again, it creates a contradiction when I see her supporting sort of uncritically One United Bank and other banking efforts, et cetera, and so forth. It's like she and certainly they have forgotten or not read or ignored her own work. Because if you go back, as I did recently, and read at least significant sections of her book, I mean, the whole book is a critique of banking as a solution and a history of Black banking as a solution. Now, she doesn't go to take any radical, she's not making a radical per se analysis of that, but she's just saying that, and the point in where I got this quote from is that she's talking about the white elite of the day who were concerned about what form Black liberation would take post Civil War, happily encouraged Black people to engage in banking because they knew that this was never going to be a threat to them. And then Baratheon details how Frederick Douglass and others tried to support Black banks and invested their own money in it, and it just was unsustainable. Some of it is shady, corrupt, Black and white, whoever involved. But the real point is Baratheon lays out throughout the whole book is Black people don't have any money. Black people don't get outside investment. Black people cannot take what they do have and invest in sectors of the economy that produce returns. The returns that are produced go to a tiny elite within the Black community. So that's why the phrase they wanted freedom, but instead they got a bank. And then as I just added, big bank take little bank. It's that simple. YG do it. Little bank doesn't circulate its dollars and invest and become a big bank. No, big bank take little bank and become bigger bank. And then as I had here in the conclusion, it's something I've obviously talked a lot about and quoted many times here and elsewhere, but just from George Jackson, his whole point, Black capitalism, Black against itself, the silliest contradiction in a long train of spineless, mindless contradictions. Another painless ultimate remedy. Be a better fascist than the fascist. Bill Cosby acting out the establishment agent. What message was this soul brother conveying to our children? I Spy was certainly programmed to a child's mentality. This running dog in the company of a fascist with a cause, a flunky's flunky, was transmitting the credo of the slave to our youth. The mod version of the old house nigger. We can never learn to trust as long as we have them. They are as much a part of the repression, more even than real live rat informer pig. Than the real live rat informer pig. Aren't they telling our kids that it's romantic to be a running dog? The kids are so hungry to see the Black male do some shooting and throw some hands that they can't help themselves from identifying with the Quislings. So first they turn us against ourselves, precluding all possibility of trust. Then fascism takes any latent divisible forces and develops them into divisions in fact, racism, nationalism, religions. So I honestly think, with all due respect to George Jackson, that in today's world, it's more complicated to make this point. As hard as it was then to get young Black people and others to see Bill Cosby's portrayal as an FBI agent as a negative, I think it's harder today to see the same content being delivered by the Earn Your Leisures, by the 19 Keys and the thought leaders.
The Court's top thought leader.
I mean, I think that when we see that, I have my little jokes and fun with it, but the reality is I think that they're carrying the same message that Bill Cosby was carrying in the TV show that George is critiquing here. And they're doing the same thing. It's carrying that same message of bravado and success and victory, and we can win, and I'm throwing hands at master system and all this other stuff. And it comes with that same, so you can see it have that same impact on Black youth. And I would argue the same thing. Just as George Jackson is saying that I Spy was programmed to a children's mentality, the analysis, the arguments offered by these producers of the Black capitalist mythology are themselves taking a childish, a sophomoric analysis of economics and delivering that as programming to a Black youth and to an uninformed, ill-prepared older community who are being preyed upon by these messages. So it's not that it is a child's mentality applied to an economic analysis to simply say invest better and all the things that they say and do all of that. That is, and I'm not even meaning to be intentionally hostile here, but that is a childish approach to economics, how they work, how they impact different communities, and particularly how Black people relate to the economy. What they say is the equivalent here, but there's more of them saying it. There's more of them saying it with greater degrees of skill and delivery and circulation than what Bill Cosby was offering back in the day. So that's why I'm saying today it's harder. We have a harder thing to deal with. It's a more difficult task confronting us than even what George was attempting to deal with. And then the last one comes from my godfather, Mr. Tom Porter. I did want to. Oh, actually, there was one more, but I'm sorry, there's one more. But the penultimate epigraph is from my godfather, Mr. Tom Porter, where he said, "Economics should never be taught on its own. It's about political economy. We need to be studying the political economy of everything." And I agree, and that's where I always, and I get that comes out of a Marxist, Leninist, materialist line, but that is the problem with this argument that we got to get our money right, then we can get our politics right, and that's how all the other communities do it. That's not how other communities have done it. That's not how the elite have created their wealth. So I try to make that argument a little bit here in the book. I try to make it obviously throughout, my work here, but that's just a misunderstanding. Political economy. How does exchange and labor and money, and how does an economy relate to power? How does it operate with the political apparatus, or as an extension of the political apparatus to maintain power for those who rule, and to maintain the extractive, abusive relationships between the elite and the rest of us? Insufficiently simply put, that's what I'm trying to get at. This idea that we can somehow separate it and get our money right and then engage the political system completely misses everything. So then lastly here, I did put in the Paul Pierce quote from when he was with the Washington Wizards and hit that crazy game-winning shot in the playoffs some years ago, and was asked by the reporter if he meant to call, because it hit off the backboard. Did he call backboard? And he brilliantly, in the moment, said, "I called game."
Did you call bank? I called game.
Game, with his walk-off game winner. And that is kind of how I felt with the conclusion of the book. I felt like even with all of its imperfections, its limitations, the limitations of my writing and my ability to organize my argument, whatever they are, is game. So my shot may have gone in off the backboard, but I call game and I won the game. It's game. So I do feel that level of confidence with the argument, with the work, which is why I keep saying, I keep wanting people to engage the work. If you look at the link, well over 90,000 downloads are registered on the website of the book, which means at least 100,000 total downloads and book copies were sold. So if you break up the chapters, the way I broke it down, it's about I think it was 7 or 8 chapters. So if it's about 90,000, so it's about so 90,000 downloads would be about 9,000 copies of the book, plus the hard copy purchases, plus the full the downloads of the full book that would have occurred. It's got to be over 100,000 copies, not 100,000 copies, but 100,000 downloads, suggesting some sort of interest in the book. And if it's 9,000 or so copies, or 10,000 copies in total, that's pretty good. That's pretty good. That's a pretty good run. And saying all that to say, I feel like enough people should have read it by now to offer up, if they have a critique, a substantive critical response. And I've not seen one from people who've demonstrated they've read the book. I've not seen one. So that's why I do feel this way about it. I call game. The best way to do it is to either avoid it all entirely, avoid the work entirely, or to rebrand it, as we've seen and discussed here, sort of rebrand the argument to make it suitable for your most likely commercial media environment. But in general, there's been no, I'm unaware at least, of any substantive critique that responds to what I've actually said in the book. Not where's your solution, not you're being mean to Black capitalists and business people. Something that says, here's what you said, and here's the data and the analysis that contradicts or shows the shortcomings of your argument. Not, again, I'm not demeaning Black business people. I'm simply saying that that's not a solution to the collective problem of Black people. So if that's the claim of anyone, then we are in disagreement. And that's, so then where is the argument? Because there is no history or data or historical record or data that I'm aware of that shows how business and Black capitalism has made an advance for the collective. In fact, the data shows pretty much the opposite. So that's what I'm working off of, and my attempt to adhere to a Black radical tradition. So, all right, good people, that'll do it. That was just a few epigraphs I wanted to talk a little bit about in advance, and waiting for the second edition of the book to come out sometime in the spring. Very much thank you for checking this out. Please drop any comments or questions and let me know what you think. We always want to hear from you, so definitely
put it in the comments.
And let me know if you think
it's wrong, bro.
Or, maybe I got my facts wrong. I don't know. Let me know what you think. Otherwise, definitely, I hope you got the
message.
And I'll look for you, the next time here at I Mix What I Like It throughout the BPM platform. Thanks again for all your support. Make sure you like, subscribe, ring that notification bell, and put this in your social somewhere and share it and invite others to get this good work, so that you don't, don't be stingy. Don't hoard it all to yourself. We're about redistribution over here. All right, everybody. Like Fred Hampton used to say to you, we say peace if you're willing to fight for it. So peace, everybody. Catch you next time right here at I Mix What I Like. Thanks.
I mix what I like, what I like.